Hi there. In this video, we'll be covering writing and publishing a legacy book. In this video, we'll explore the two paths to publishing that you want to consider for your book, and hopefully through that process, you'll figure out which one's right for you. By the end of this video, you'll learn how to gather materials and research, the importance of interviews, and the path to publication. And stay tuned until the end of the video for an opportunity I really think you're going to enjoy. Let's dive in. It is so special to write a legacy book. You think about all of the struggles and all the challenges and all of the stories that your family has passed down from one generation to the next. You want those stories to be preserved. You want them to be remembered. You want your children and your children's children to remember these stories and have them available. You don't want these stories to fade away. You want to carry them forward. And a book is such an awesome way to document these stories and to preserve them for future generations. At this point, I've worked on 5 different legacy books as a ghostwriter or as a writing coach. You know, I've worked with families, I've worked with authors to help them to bring their stories forward. You know, it can be so special to look at where relatives came from. You know, if it's an American-based family, you know, where the relatives came from, where they settled from, and the ups and downs that they faced along the way. Because there's challenges our families faced in coming here and settling and succeeding. And then you see like one generation to the next of this level of success coming through. You know, and it's so interesting to be able to reflect and look back and see who came before us and the issues they faced and the ups and downs. When we think about writing a legacy book, it requires a lot of research. It requires a lot of understanding. It requires a lot of digging deep into our family stories, into the things that are passed down. What has been preserved from the past already, whether in newspaper articles, whether in historical societies, whether in documents and family legacy stories. It's neat to explore it. You know, I have subscriptions to websites like Ancestry and newspapers.com, and it's so special to dive into the research. There is so much information that's out there that we haven't even thought about. You know, school yearbooks, census information, birth and death records, immigration stories, photos. You know, from these resources, they pretty much streamlined what would have taken years and years worth of research to dig up and find, you know, into days. You could spend a couple days or a couple weeks doing research that previously would have taken years to complete. It's fascinating to see how much easier ancestral research is today on Ancestry and on newspapers.com. I go through records all the time. You know, I think back to the family projects I've worked on, and so much of that was available in public records. Those public records aren't the answer, of course, but they provide a framework for us. The data and the documents are one thing. It's another thing to interview people, interview some of our older relatives especially, because they've heard those stories passed down. So then you can actually compare the stories that they've been receiving and they've heard over the years with the data and with the information, with the ancestral research that you've done. So you have these elements of quotations and stories along with the documents. The documents are so important. The interviews are important too because they breathe life into these stories. You know, how do we tell the stories? You know, it's about breathing life into the census data and the documents you received. It's not enough just to be like, oh, they were born here and they did this and they did this. Breathing life into it matters. So talking to people, interviewing them, finding out more about how your relatives lived, you know, and how everybody experienced life, you know, how they grew into these things. It's such a valuable thing to balance the data with the interviews and fill this all in. The next step when you think about gathering the information and talking to people is writing the book, writing the draft. You know, and there's so many different ways to go about writing that draft. You know, I think back to one project in particular that involved 3 different generations of a family. You know, and it started with the dad, section 1, and section 2 is about the mom, and it went on from there, you know. But looking at the transition from one element to the next, from one generation to the next, you know, it's so special to see the progression and see the dots connecting and recognize how these trends and these elements all fit together. You know, what are the building blocks that the earlier generations developed that we were able to then climb upon and dig even deeper and go even further because of the things that they did for us. Seeing all these things connecting, seeing how families got intertwined or fell apart. It's a matter of change, and life is all about change. And we see change happening, on a yearly and decade-wide and generation-wide level. And you can definitely see those things come through when we talk about one generation to the next and the stories that we have and the stories that we leave behind. So the writing the draft, gathering the information, all these elements are important. And then you ultimately have to think about the path to publication. And there's two real paths to publication. There's traditional publishing and there's self-publishing. With traditional publishing, you work with a literary agent, and the literary agent then works with publishers to find a deal for you. It is an interesting process. It's a frustrating process. In order for you to have a commercially viable book, your family's story has to have some notoriety or fame attached to it. You have to have a big social media platform. You have to have something. There's something there. And I think a lot of times we look at traditional publishing as like a big five. I ultimately look at it from the perspective, in this case, of university presses. I think university presses offer a lot of opportunity for legacy projects, especially when we think about narrowing down the focus. Maybe it's about a specific place. Maybe there's a university press nearby that would be interested in publishing this book because of the place that it represents. So when we think about this legacy project, what is the focus and what kind of publisher might be interested? I think about a friend of mine, Teresa, and she's working on a book about her grandmother. And her grandmother was a newspaper publisher in the Midwest in the early to mid 1900s, and she had this big impact. There's areas of focus within that book that I believe there's going to be university presses that are interested in that story. University presses located in the area where this book comes from. It's those sorts of things. It's about thinking about who might be interested in this project. And traditional publishing faces more obstacles. You have to really focus a little bit more on the commercial side of it, on the marketability of it, on your ability to sell books. And you might not be interested in any of those things. A lot of the legacy projects I work on are not interested in those things at all. They're actually interested in just publishing the book and preserving it, which is then why self-publishing becomes such a great option. With self-publishing, you control every element. You control the photos, you control the layout, you control the way it looks, you control where you sell it, you control everything within the book process, which is compelling, especially with legacy projects. You want this to be exactly what you want it to be for your generations, for your family. This is a project that's so dear to you. You want to be able to do it your way, and you want to have control. With legacy books, given the fact that there's such a personal connection to it, money is often not a factor at all. There's no revenue driving, there's no interest in driving revenue from it. It's simply an opportunity to tell a story, to honor our past, to pass along a story for future generations. There's all these elements at play that are all about the sentimental and all about the feeling and all about the sense of pride knowing that we did something to preserve our family story. When you're thinking about those things, self-publishing is a great option, because you have the control, you have the power, you have the ability to work with whoever you want to work with and to put together a book that's really going to last and really going to resonate. You don't want it just to be some mindless exercise where you publish the thing, no one reads it, and that's it. You want it to pass down. You want it to be something special. You want it to really resonate. And I think about the authors I worked with to help them round out their family stories, their legacy projects. And there was never any conversation about money. It was really about getting the story told and writing something that honors their family, and to see the sense of pride and contentment from them to be able to do that and to be able to document their story. It's such a powerful thing. And I just think self-publishing offers so many opportunities for legacy books. And, I think if you're interested in writing a legacy book, you should keep an open mind about self-publishing because it's a great option. One more thing to keep in mind too about the book writing process in general. It's so easy for people to get stuck when they're looking at finishing the project and bringing it to publication. To work with editors, to work with designers. There are so many good professionals out there. You want to work with somebody who is high quality. You don't want to cut corners either. You know, so many times when authors are working on finishing their book, they'll try to cut corners on the editing process. You know, they'll streamline it. They'll work with some friend of theirs, designer, who might not actually know about books, but they know design, so be it. Like, you want to do this right, and you want to spend the time and effort and energy to get it right. You don't want to rush, and you don't want to cut corners. This is something that you want to last. This is something that is going to mean something decades from now. You want it to be on your family's bookshelf 20, 30, 50 years from now. You know, you want to be proud of this, you know, and by rushing, you know, you really sell yourself short. So don't rush. Work with high quality professionals and spend the time in editing and design to get it right, because there's so many special things you can do with a legacy project, especially with archival pictures and other things. Given the limited printing that you might see from this legacy book, especially if you're just focused on your family and a small batch, you know, you can do so many things with color photography now, you know, that you don't have to worry about making this book mass market simple design. You can do something really, really profound and special with high quality color photography inside, and you know, so many different elements that really punch up this thing. So don't rush it. Take your time, work with professionals, and get it right. If you want to learn more about writing and publishing a legacy book, I definitely want to mention another opportunity for you. I launched a good book accountability course for authors who are struggling, authors who are hitting a wall, just to motivate, inspire, and inform you as much as possible to make this process easier, because I know how scary and overwhelming it can be to publish a book. So if you're interested in learning more about the course, definitely check it out. Head to my website. It's goodbookmastery.com. You can click the link below. Remember, a good book can change your life. I'm Dan Good. Thanks for watching.